with Antoni Muntadas. Very happy that have made it to Stockholm to visit us and give a lecture on at the School of Architecture around the notion of fear, the construction of fear. That maybe we'll pick on this later. But to start with, maybe what's your relation with the context of Scandinavian countries, of Stockholm? Do you have some previous experience or knowledge of this part of the world?
Yeah, I think not much. I think the 70s, I visited Stockholm, and I remember it was the splendorous moment of the Moderna Museum under Pontus Hulten. Very interesting situation. I recall to see a show, The Death of a Hippie, by Paul Tech. And later on, I was invited to Ars 95, but this was in Helsinki.
Yeah.
It's a kind of event that I think it has certain importance in the Nordic countries. And I think it started with the countries of the Scandinavian part, but then it becomes open up to, when I participated, was a lot of international artists. And I did a work for the beginning of a series that after become important for me, the On Translation series.
Right.
And that it was the On Translation, the pavilion. It was involved with the pavilion of Alvar Aalto and with the use of language in a kind of international forums of translation, the use of, in Finland, of Finnish, but also Swedish, Russian, English. All that, it was really the component of that work, and it was showing in a public pavilion in the street, in the promenade in Helsinki. And that was, I spent time producing the work there. After on, I was some teaching in Norway, at Trondheim. I recall the best hotel with the best breakfast of my life. And I'm ready to go back
To have
when they invite me.
To have breakfast only.
Now I'm here, happy with to, I think, touch base and to understand better because everything I have is flashes, to a little bit more to what is going on and the understanding of the city. I see a lot of new architecture, and I look forward for the two presentation at the Museum of Architecture and at the School of Architecture.
Very interesting. You mentioned the translation series started here. I didn't know that, because that's been, and then also the relation to architecture. So it's been maybe two, especially the series on translation, one of the really core, long-standing work that you've been continuously developing. And within this also there is the connection between, or your interest for architecture, or the relation between art and architecture.
Yeah, the pavilion, on translation, the pavilion, it was really connected to, I never see the on translation about pure language in terms of, I think it's more about cultural translation,
Right.
how contexts are creating a series of understandings, interpretation, and then in a way created this idea of when you move on not only in the language, but you move it in cultures. And in terms of the translation is the translation on cultures. Like that, since then, context is important. I rarely do a work that is not connected with the context where the work is. For that reason, sometimes the work takes time. because you need to know certain parameters or the emphasis of the intentions of the work.
Right. Maybe that's why, or one of the reasons why your projects really are very long. Like, in order to work with the context, usually you spend lots of time in the places you work or you develop projects, and is a kind of method of really being in a context and knowing a context, which, as a result, makes kind of a long process of producing a project.
Yeah, I really emphasize on what I call the methodology of the project.
Right.
In architecture, the language project, the word project is common. In the arts, people are talking more about works and about pieces. I hated that word because I don't think it's a terminology they had to do with me. I relate to project because it's a long term and involve a series of process, and in a way I share that when I'm teaching. The class I'm teaching now in Venice, Laboratorio d'Arte Visiva, the methodology of the project is the base of the teaching. A process, the initiation of a process, and explain to the participants that the work requires time, a lot of research, a lot of understanding of the context. Questions, they come up maybe for the use of methodology, they come from sociology, like interviews or field work, trabajo de campo. All that are important for me as an input to related art, not as a exclusive situation, but inclusive, where interdisciplinary reference like social science or communication systems nourish the project. Like that, in the project takes time because, between the frames take me 10 years, so the system of art. The project in ASEAN protocols about China, Korea, Japan, similarities and difference take me 8 years. You know, I think I started the project by curiosity to try to learn more, and it takes the time.
Right.
I am not too much respect deadlines.
Right.
I think if institutions they ask me deadlines, I say, well, listen, or you leave me the door open, or ciao.
All right. And is it that projects end in a way, or an end usually in a display or in an exhibition, or can there be several moments where you are displaying or producing some kind of a object of communication?
Well, the fact that the project takes time, you arrive at a kind of consensus myself that the project is ready to be shown.
Right.
I never show works, the process of the work. I think the process of the work is like to show the dirty cloth. I try to show the clean cloth.
Clean cloth.
I think the process of cleaning, it means the synthesis of the process where, you know, like the wine, as much time, the better is the wine, you know. In a way, supposedly that a project takes time, I invest, involved, and I give me the time to think in a way that I consider that ready to this become public. But it don't mean that later on it could be revised, the project, or extended, or part two, or a kind of extended situation.
This is a kind of a parallelism with architecture also, the long-term project or the time that really takes to develop. Although maybe a difference would be that architectural projects usually happen or are developed within an office or a practice, whereas your work is you basically working, but perhaps also you create teams or connections with local actors or institutions that throughout this time work with you. Is this relation important, or you create specific teams for a project?
Yeah, well, it's one thing. It's interesting, maybe because the conversation we talk, you as an architect, myself as an artist, that most of my teaching has been in architecture schools. 40 years in MIT, in the School of Architecture, Center for Advanced Visual Studies, but depending of the School of. Then ACT is Art, Culture and Technology, also MIT, depending of architecture. In Venice, UAP, Laboratorio Artivisivas, depending of the School of Architecture. Like that, I feel like the language or the vocabulary of the project itself, it has to do with elements and maybe the way of working are closer. I'm not interested to do a kind of a studio production of objects. It's more closer to project long-term systems, works that in a way are, as you say, collaborative. Most of the time I work with a group of people. I mean, never, or practically I never work alone on a project. I think it's, I am considering an artist post-studio, not necessary to have a studio working in this kind of ivory tower where you go to looking for the inspiration. And, you know, my inspiration is the street. Inspiration is with other people. Is reading the newspaper, watching the TV, and inform and know what is going on. And the things that I'm curious is to know more about these things that happen. I think contemporary artists should reflect always the contemporary life. I mean, everything I'm talking about exists. I never created an imagination of a project. Then maybe you could use the fictions of the way or the metaphor, symbology, and the linguistics of the symbols. It could be part of that, but I would say everything I'm talking about is contemporary phenomena.
Yeah. And you've mentioned the project in Istanbul, which, if I remember correctly, it was a radio kind of station or channel that you created in collaboration with people. So it makes me think, perhaps, that you were mentioning the project as a methodology, and perhaps the connection with architecture. Could it be a difference that whereas architecture could be perhaps a more limited output, even though maybe now it's a bit, open to other kind of formats, but in your case, what becomes very important is also the media, or finding the right format that this project takes at the end, and it's never the same. So, like in Istanbul with the radio program, whereas in other cases it's installations, videos, photography, publication.
Well, working with a certain methodology of the project, he arrived one moment where the medium becomes evident. I never start a project knowing which medium I go to use. I am developing the project, arriving to a situation that I think the work, the ideas, the concepts, the research is ready. Then comes in a certain kind of obvious way to decide with the medium is. If it's got to be a publication, if it's a program for radio, a program for television, if it's an installation. You don't mind, I think, these guys that are talking to...
I'm gonna listen.
I don't know, it's up to you. Tú me dices cuando tiras. El choice of medium will depend the project itself. In some projects they require certain kind of narrative or certain kind of image series, or sometimes it has to do with the idea of the interviews he has connected to a video of filming situation. I think it's important to choose the medium. For that, I never understand these concepts of video artists or photo artists or installation artists, you know. I think it's an artist that use different medium than they are useful for the project, you know. That's it.
Right. All right. Perhaps now going back to the beginning and this idea of translation and thinking about also overlaps between art and architecture. I remember at some point you said that for you, public space is a kind of translation also, or it's a translated concept. How do you see the role of public or the notion of public space, or how do you engage with it in your work?
Well, obviously, I'm working in what I call protected spaces. They are really galleries, museums, cultural institutions, the teaching aspect, also in schools, and then what I call public space, that is open up to the streets, the squares, television, radio, internet. And that is a territory very different than the protected space. Protected space, they have a certain rules, you know, the space, the audience, the protocol of people go and see the shows to understand what they go to see. In the street, no, in the street people find the work, they don't know what it is. They don't know if it's advertising or if it's something like, they don't frame it. And that aspect is interesting, and that's the reason I use that sentence, warning, perception, require involvement, because in order to understand the work, you need to get involved. And that the author, the artist has responsibilities, but the audience has responsibilities too. To try to understand what is going on, or to really, if you see something, to try to see, well, to perceive or to try to understand what is seeing or what is listening. That working in public space, more than calling public art, I like art in public space, because not everything in the public space is art. That the wish to produce something in the public space is to enlarge the possibility of the audience. And of course, historically, it started with the idea of the monument, you know, with the construction, with the cities are full of monuments with the political figures, cultural figures, historical figures, always based on this idea of the pedestal and the monument on top. An institution asks an artist to do and do it. It's not much more relationship, no more negotiation. With the time, what I call anti-monument is the existing the pedestal or disappearing the pedestal. I think the Bourgeois de Calais, I think is the first work where the pedestal disappear, and the minimalist and conceptual sculpture, obviously the pedestal disappear, and our in instance institution, our corporations, they are asking. I mean, the sculpture they become like a logo for the institution. Both monument and anti-monuments are permanent. And then I move in the, I think it's the 80s, 90s, to the concept of intervention. They are temporary actions. Intervention, we know it's always done, it's got to finish. There has a finish. The others are permanent. It's the wish to keep it there for life. Considering the city change, the areas are changing, the buildings are changing, the sculpture, the architecture, the city planning, the city are changing. To keep it something permanent is risky. And also to keep the maintenance of this. It's all about negotiation, contract, the agreement. My feeling, I refuse to do permanent work. I always like it to do temporary. Temporary could be 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, but we know that it's got to be a moment, then the work is disappear, and then it could be a conversation between the audience or the citizens and the author. I say, well, the work is integrated, it's interesting, it functions, we like it to keep it. And the artist could say yes or no. Or the artist clearly say no, the city changed, I do that work, it has to do with this kind of background, now the background, the transit, the way how the city functions. That's formally, yesterday we had the conversation with Jonas Dar, then he has his work removed or unfinished or censorship in the context of Oslo,
Norway.
after winning a competition. I think it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Why? Because the whole story between the one person with power asked to somebody to do a work. Now with so many factors, I mean, I don't like that only because I think the factors is interesting, intermediary relationship, negotiation, but it couldn't be infiltrated the political system on the rejected award. I think in the conversation we say that in Sweden you have the great situation where the politics are distant to the culture. Germany too, France too. Other places not so much. Other places, in Italy, half and half. In Spain, half and half. The public art is a territory that is complex, very interesting, but I think I've been thinking, I've been reflect and teaching very much on these issues, and I have opinions about.
Yeah, right. And,
Too long to talk now.
Too long.